Richard Wellington III owned the most expensive cattle ranch in all of Texas, sprawling across 15,000 acres of prime hill country real estate outside Austin. With a net worth exceeding $200 million from his tech company empire, Wellington had spared no expense in creating Platinum Star Ranch, a showcase operation featuring the finest bloodline cattle, state-of-the-art facilities, and every piece of equipment money could buy. But for all his wealth and technological advantages, Wellington couldn't solve the problem of Zeus, a magnificent but completely unmanageable Black Angus bull worth $2.3 million. Zeus was a genetic masterpiece, bred from champion bloodlines and destined to father the next generation of prize-winning cattle. Standing 7 feet tall and weighing 3,200 pounds, he possessed the perfect combination of size, muscle definition, and breeding characteristics that made him invaluable on paper. In reality, Zeus was a 3,200-pound nightmare that had terrorized every handler on the ranch and destroyed tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment in his violent rages. "Mr. Wellington, we've tried everything," explained Dr. Marcus Stevens, the $500 per hour animal behaviorist who had been flown in from California specifically to work with Zeus. "Sedatives barely slow him down, electronic restraints just make him more aggressive, and our specialized containment system has already been rebuilt 3 times. This bull is simply beyond current behavioral modification techniques." Wellington stood outside Zeus's reinforced titanium steel enclosure, watching his $2.3 million investment pace frantically like a caged tiger. The bull's eyes burned with such concentrated fury that even experienced ranch hands refused to enter the same building without tranquilizer guns ready. Zeus had already hospitalized 2 veterinarians, destroyed a $150,000 hydraulic squeeze chute, and shown absolutely no response to any of the expensive interventions Wellington had purchased. "I don't accept failure," Wellington replied coldly, his voice carrying the arrogance of a man who had never encountered a problem that money couldn't solve. "Double Dr. Stevens' fee. Bring in specialists from Europe if necessary. Install whatever equipment costs whatever amount. That bull represents the future of this operation, and I will not be defeated by an animal." The truth was that Wellington's obsession with Zeus had become personal. In his world of corporate acquisitions and technological solutions, Wellington had never faced a challenge that couldn't be overcome through superior resources and expert consultation. The idea that a mere animal could resist his wealth and determination was not just frustrating. It was humiliating. Over the following weeks, Wellington spent an additional $300,000 bringing in the most expensive livestock specialists in the world. A renowned Swiss animal trainer charged $50,000 for a week-long consultation that ended with Zeus destroying a custom-built titanium restraint system within hours. A team of German engineers designed a computerized feeding system that Zeus systematically dismantled piece by piece, as if he took pleasure in proving that technology couldn't contain his rage. "Sir," said Maria Rodriguez, Wellington's ranch manager, during one of their weekly briefings, "maybe we should consider that Zeus's behavior isn't a technical problem to be solved. Maybe it's an emotional problem that needs understanding." Wellington's dismissive laugh revealed his contempt for any solution that didn't involve expensive expertise. "Maria, I didn't build a $200 million fortune by believing in emotional solutions to practical problems. Zeus is a valuable asset experiencing behavioral dysfunction. What he needs is the right combination of pharmaceutical intervention and mechanical restraint." What Wellington didn't know was that his arrogance and obsession with technological solutions was about to be challenged by Frank Martinez, a 78-year-old former ranch hand who had been watching the situation unfold from his modest trailer home on the edge of town. Frank lived on Social Security and odd jobs, barely making ends meet in a 1-bedroom trailer that would have fit in Wellington's walk-in closet. But Frank possessed something that all of Wellington's money couldn't buy: 60 years of experience reading the hearts of traumatized animals. Frank had worked cattle ranches across Texas since he was 14 years old, learning from old-timers who understood that the most dangerous bulls were usually the most frightened ones. He had heard about Zeus through the tight-knit community of current and former ranch workers who gossiped about Wellington's expensive failures over coffee at the local diner. That rich man's got it all backwards. Frank told his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. You can't force an animal to trust you. Trust is earned through patience and understanding, not bought with fancy equipment. Mrs. Chen, who had known Frank for 15 years and had seen him gentle aggressive dogs, heal wounded birds, and calm panicked horses with nothing but time and kindness, encouraged him to approach Wellington. Frank, maybe that bull needs someone who sees him as more than just an expensive investment. Frank laughed bitterly. A man like Wellington doesn't want advice from someone like me. I'm just a poor old Mexican ranch hand who never owned anything worth more than $1,000. Men like him don't believe poor people have anything valuable to offer. But as Frank heard more stories about Zeus's increasingly violent behavior and Wellington's escalating frustration, he began to feel a pull he couldn't ignore. Somewhere on that fancy ranch was an animal in pain, and Frank had spent his entire life believing that every creature deserved someone who would try to understand their suffering. The breaking point came when Frank learned that Wellington was considering having Zeus destroyed if the next round of expensive interventions failed. The idea of a magnificent animal being killed because wealthy experts couldn't solve his emotional problems was more than Frank could bear. Mrs. Chen, Frank said, straightening his bent shoulders with a determination that surprised both of them. I think it's time this poor grandpa taught a millionaire that some problems can't be solved with money. Have you ever felt dismissed or overlooked because of your economic status, only to know in your heart that you possessed wisdom or skills that could help? If only someone would give you the chance to prove your worth. Frank Martinez spent 3 days working up the courage to approach Platinum Star Ranch, knowing that a man like Wellington would likely have him escorted off the property before he could even explain his purpose. Frank's 1998 pickup truck looked embarrassingly shabby against the backdrop of Wellington's gleaming facilities as he pulled up to the ranch's imposing electronic gates, but his determination outweighed his nervousness. State your business, crackled a voice through the intercom system as security cameras automatically tracked Frank's beat-up vehicle. My name is Frank Martinez. I'm here to help with Zeus, the bull that's been giving you trouble, Frank replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. 20 minutes later, Frank found himself standing in Wellington's opulent ranch office, surrounded by awards, expensive art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the vast empire Wellington had built. The contrast between Frank's simple work clothes and Wellington's designer ranch wear was stark, and Wellington's expression made it clear that he considered this meeting a waste of his valuable time. Let me understand this correctly, Wellington said, his tone dripping with condescension. You're a 78-year-old man who lives in a trailer park, and you believe you can solve a problem that has defeated some of the most expensive animal specialists in the world? Frank met Wellington's dismissive stare without flinching. Mr. Wellington, I've been working with cattle for 60 years. I've gentled bulls that everyone else wanted to destroy. Zeus isn't a technical problem. He's a scared animal who's learned that humans mean pain and fear. Wellington's laugh was sharp and humorless. Dr. Stevens spent 8 years studying animal psychology at Stanford. The Swiss specialist has handled prize bulls for European royalty. What exactly makes you think your folksy wisdom could succeed where scientific expertise has failed? Because they're trying to dominate Zeus instead of understanding him, Frank replied quietly. You can't buy trust, Mr. Wellington. You have to earn it. If Frank's courage to stand up for what he believes in is inspiring you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories about the power of heart over wealth. Wellington was about to dismiss Frank entirely when Maria Rodriguez interrupted the meeting. Sir, Zeus just destroyed the new European restraint system. That's another $75,000 in damages, and Dr. Stevens is recommending euthanasia. The news hit Wellington like a physical blow. He had invested over $500,000 trying to solve Zeus's behavioral problems, and every failure felt like a personal defeat. Looking at Frank's weathered face and calloused hands, Wellington made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. Fine, Wellington said tersely. You have 1 hour to prove your theory, but if you get injured or killed, it's not my responsibility. Frank nodded calmly. I understand, but I won't need restraints or sedatives or special equipment. All I need is time and patience. The walk to Zeus's enclosure felt like a journey between two different worlds. Wellington's entourage included Dr. Stevens, Maria Rodriguez, 3 security guards, and a veterinarian with emergency tranquilizers ready. Frank walked alone, carrying nothing but a small paper bag and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from decades of successful experience. Zeus's reaction to the approaching group was immediate and violent. The massive bull charged the reinforced fence with such force that the ground shook, his bellowing roars echoing across the ranch like thunder. The security team instinctively stepped back, but Frank continued walking until he was standing just outside Zeus's pen. "Easy there, big fellow," Frank said softly, his voice barely audible over Zeus's aggressive displays. "I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt. But I'm not here to hurt you anymore." Wellington watched with a mixture of fascination and disbelief as Frank settled himself on an overturned bucket about 10 feet from the fence, completely ignoring Zeus's threatening charges and ear-splitting bellows. Instead of trying to assert dominance or control the situation, Frank simply sat quietly and began speaking to Zeus in the same gentle tone he might use with a frightened child. "You're a beautiful animal," Frank continued, his calm voice creating in strange contrast to Zeus's fury. "Someone hurt you badly, didn't they? Made you believe that every human wants to cause you pain. But that's not true. Some of us understand that you're just protecting yourself the only way you know how." After 30 minutes of Frank's patient presence, something remarkable began to happen. Zeus's charges became less frequent, his bellowing quieted to occasional snorts, and his entire posture shifted from aggressive to wary. The bull was still alert and ready to fight, but he was also listening. Frank reached into his paper bag and pulled out an apple, cutting it into small pieces with a worn pocket knife. He placed the pieces on the ground near the fence and continued talking to Zeus about the weather, the beautiful Texas hill country, and anything else that came to mind. His tone never changed, always gentle, always respectful, always patient. "Frank," Wellington whispered, not wanting to break whatever spell was being woven. "How are you doing this?" "I'm not doing anything to him," Frank replied quietly. "I'm just showing him that not every human interaction has to be about control and dominance. Sometimes it can just be about respect and kindness." By the end of the hour, Zeus was standing calmly near the fence, occasionally sniffing in the direction of Frank's apple offerings but making no aggressive moves. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was undeniable. The bull that had terrorized million-dollar experts was responding to a poor grandfather's simple approach. Wellington stared at the scene in stunned silence, his entire understanding of value and expertise suddenly called into question by an old man who possessed nothing but wisdom earned through decades of patient practice. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone with humble means accomplished something that all the money and experts in the world couldn't achieve, making you question what we really value in our society? Word of Frank's initial success with Zeus spread through Platinum Star Ranch like wildfire, creating a buzz of excitement among workers who had watched Wellington's expensive failures with growing skepticism. For the first time since Zeus's arrival, ranch hands were willing to work in the same building as the bull, drawn by curiosity about the elderly man who had achieved in 1 hour what $500,000 couldn't accomplish. Wellington found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to acknowledge that Frank's unconventional approach was producing results. After years of using wealth as the solution to every problem, Wellington was being forced to consider that some challenges required humility and patience rather than money and technology. "I want to document this process," Wellington told Dr. Stevens, who was equally baffled by Frank's success. "If this old man can really reach Zeus, I need to understand how he's doing it so we can replicate the technique." But Frank's methods defied conventional analysis. Each morning, he would arrive at the ranch in his battered pickup truck, carrying the same simple paper bag of apple slices and wearing the same faded work clothes. He would position his overturned bucket in exactly the same spot and begin what appeared to be ordinary conversations with Zeus, as if the massive bull were an old friend rather than a dangerous animal. If you're amazed by how Frank's simple approach is changing everything, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Stories like these remind us that wisdom often comes in humble packages. "Good morning, Zeus," Frank would say each day, his voice carrying genuine warmth and affection. "How are you feeling today? You look a little less angry than yesterday. That's good progress." Dr. Stevens tried to categorize Frank's techniques according to established behavioral modification principles, but Frank's approach seemed to transcend scientific methodology. "He's not using any recognized training protocols," Dr. Stevens confided to Wellington. "He's simply talking to the bull as if it were a person. According to everything I learned in graduate school, this shouldn't work." Over the following weeks, Zeus's transformation accelerated in ways that amazed everyone who witnessed it. The bull began approaching the fence when Frank arrived, clearly anticipating their daily conversations. Zeus's aggressive posturing disappeared entirely during Frank's visits, replaced by curious attention and what could only be described as genuine affection. The breakthrough moment came during Frank's third week at the ranch. Wellington and his team watched in astonishment as Zeus gently accepted apple slices directly from Frank's hand through the fence. The first voluntary physical contact the bull had made with any human since his arrival at Platinum Star Ranch. "Mr. Wellington," Frank said quietly as Zeus continued eating from his hand. "Zeus isn't a behavioral problem. He's a lonely animal who's learned to protect himself through aggression. All he really needed was someone who could see past his anger to understand his heart." Wellington stared at the scene before him, watching his $2.3 million investment interact peacefully with a man who earned less in a year than Wellington spent on a single business lunch. The contrast forced Wellington to confront uncomfortable truths about his own assumptions regarding value and worth. Maria Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the daily sessions, approached Wellington with a suggestion that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. "Sir, I think Frank could actually enter Zeus's pen safely now. The bull trusts him completely." The idea of Frank entering Zeus's enclosure terrified Wellington, not because he cared deeply about Frank's safety, but because the liability implications were staggering. But Frank himself seemed completely confident about the next step in Zeus's rehabilitation. "Zeus and I understand each other now," Frank explained to Wellington and the assembled team of experts. "He knows I'm not here to hurt him or control him. I'm just here to be his friend." Against every instinct of caution and legal responsibility, Wellington authorized Frank to enter Zeus's pen under carefully controlled conditions. Dr. Stevens and the veterinary team stood ready with tranquilizer guns, while security cameras recorded every moment of what everyone assumed would be either a miracle or a catastrophe. Frank entered the pen slowly, carrying his usual apple slices and speaking in the same gentle tone that had become Zeus's daily source of comfort. "Hello there, big fellow. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me visit your home." Zeus approached Frank without any signs of aggression, allowing the elderly man to stroke his massive head and neck. The physical contact that had been impossible for expensive experts was offered freely to a poor grandfather who had earned it through patience and understanding. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Stevens whispered to Wellington as they watched Frank brush Zeus's coat with a technique that looked more like petting than professional grooming. "That bull is displaying attachment behaviors typically reserved for primary caregivers. Frank has essentially become Zeus's adopted family." Wellington watched the interaction with emotions he couldn't fully identify. Part of him felt vindicated that his expensive bull was finally manageable. But another part felt humbled by the realization that Frank's poverty had never diminished his extraordinary gift for understanding animals. The transformation wasn't limited to Zeus. Frank's daily presence at the ranch had begun affecting other animals as well. Horses that had been skittish around handlers became calm when Frank was nearby. Cattle that had been difficult to manage showed improved behavior after Frank spent time with them. The elderly man's natural empathy seemed to create an atmosphere of trust that benefited every animal on the property. "Frank," Wellington said one afternoon as they watched Zeus graze peacefully while Frank sat nearby reading a book, "I owe you an apology. I judged you based on your economic status instead of your abilities. That was both unfair and foolish." Frank smiled, his weathered face creasing with genuine warmth. "Mr. Wellington, we all make assumptions about people based on appearances. The important thing is being willing to admit when we're wrong and learn from our mistakes. Do you think our society has lost touch with the kind of wisdom that comes from experience and empathy, placing too much value on wealth and credentials while overlooking the profound gifts that humble people often possess?" 6 months after Frank's first encounter with Zeus, Platinum Star Ranch had become an unlikely pilgrimage destination for animal behaviorists, livestock specialists, and wealthy ranchers who couldn't believe that a poor grandfather had accomplished what their expensive experts couldn't. Wellington found himself in the unprecedented position of hosting visitors who came not to admire his technology or facilities, but to learn from his humble employee. Frank had officially been hired as Platinum Star Ranch's Senior Animal Relations Specialist, a title Wellington created specifically to acknowledge Frank's unique role. The salary wasn't enormous by Wellington's standards, but it was enough to move Frank out of his trailer into a comfortable cottage on the ranch property, where he could be closer to Zeus and the other animals that had come to depend on his calming presence. The Frank Martinez method had become the subject of academic papers, documentary films, and a best-selling book that Frank had been convinced to write about his approach to animal psychology. Universities offered him honorary degrees, and ranchers across the country sought his consultation on their most difficult livestock challenges. But for Frank, the recognition was less important than the relationships he continued to build with animals that others had given up on. Zeus had become his closest companion, a gentle giant who followed Frank around the ranch like an enormous, devoted dog. The bull that had once been impossible to touch now served as a therapy animal for other traumatized livestock, demonstrating through his calm presence that healing was possible. "You know what I learned from Zeus?" Frank told a group of veterinary students who had come to study his methods. "I learned that every creature has a story of pain, and every story of pain contains the seeds of healing. Zeus taught me that love doesn't require understanding everything about someone. It just requires accepting them exactly as they are." Wellington's transformation had been as remarkable as Zeus's. The arrogant millionaire who had once dismissed Frank's value based on his poverty had become one of Frank's most passionate advocates. Wellington used his wealth and influence to fund animal welfare programs that applied Frank's principles of patience and empathy to livestock management across the country. "Frank opened my eyes to the difference between cost and value," Wellington explained to a gathering of business leaders who had come to see the ranch's transformation. "I spent $500,000 on experts and equipment, but the real solution cost nothing except time, patience, and respect. Frank taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased. They can only be earned." The partnership between Wellington and Frank had evolved into genuine friendship, bridging the economic divide that had initially separated them. Wellington's business success had taught him to appreciate efficiency and results, while Frank's wisdom had taught him to value character and kindness. Together, they had created a model for livestock management that prioritized animal welfare alongside productivity. Dr. Stevens, who had initially been skeptical of Frank's unscientific approach, had become one of his most enthusiastic supporters. "What Frank accomplished with Zeus challenges everything we thought we knew about animal behavior modification," Dr. Stevens wrote in his research summary. "He proved that emotional intelligence and empathy can be more effective than any pharmaceutical or mechanical intervention." The success at Platinum Star Ranch attracted attention from animal rights organizations, agricultural colleges, and even Hollywood producers interested in Frank's story. But Frank remained focused on the individual animals in his care, treating each one as a unique individual with their own needs and personality. Zeus, meanwhile, had become a celebrity in his own right. The bull that had once been impossible to touch now welcomed visitors, served as a model for animal photography, and had even appeared in educational videos about humane livestock handling. But his strongest bond remained with Frank, and the daily conversations between the elderly man and the massive bull continued to be the emotional foundation of the ranch. "People ask me what my secret is with animals," Frank told a documentary crew filming at the ranch. "The secret is that there is no secret. Animals respond to the same things humans respond to: respect, kindness, patience, and genuine care. Zeus didn't need to be dominated or controlled. He needed to be understood and loved. The documentary, titled The Heart Whisperer: Frank Martinez's Gift, aired on national television and brought Frank's story to millions of viewers worldwide. The film's message, that wisdom and compassion matter more than wealth and status, resonated with audiences who felt overlooked or undervalued in their own lives. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came during the ranch's annual open house, when hundreds of visitors gathered to see Frank's work with Zeus and other animals. Among the crowd was a group of elderly ranch workers, men and women like Frank who had spent their lives working with animals but had never received recognition for their skills. "Frank," said one old cowboy with tears in his eyes, "you made us all proud. You showed the world that poor people can have rich wisdom and that experience matters more than education." As the celebration continued into the evening, with Frank demonstrating his gentle techniques and Zeus serving as a willing participant in educational presentations, Wellington reflected on how completely his understanding of value had changed. "Frank," Wellington said as they watched Zeus interact peacefully with visiting children, "you didn't just save Zeus. You saved me from the arrogance of believing that money could solve every problem." Frank smiled, his weathered hand resting on Zeus's massive head. "Mr. Wellington, we saved each other. You gave me the chance to prove that poor doesn't mean worthless, and Zeus taught us both that the heart sees what the eyes miss." As stars began to appear over the Texas hill country, Frank and Zeus stood together in the pasture where their friendship had begun, proof that the most profound connections often develop between the most unlikely companions when we approach each other with open hearts and genuine respect. Do you believe that our society would be transformed if we judged people by the wisdom in their hearts, rather than the wealth in their bank accounts, and gave everyone the chance to contribute their unique gifts regardless of their economic status?